My name is America Wilson, and at 68 years old, I never thought I would be homeless after burying my only son, James. The day after the funeral minuera, my daughter-in-law looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Now pack your bags and learn to survive." With nowhere to go, I lived in my old Honda for 2 weeks, crying myself to sleep each night. If you are watching this video, let me know where you are from and subscribe, because what happened next changed everything. Before my world fell apart, I had what most would consider a comfortable life. James and I had always been extraordinarily close. As a self-made tech entrepreneur, he had achieved success beyond anything I could have imagined for the little boy I raised alone in our small Portland apartment. Despite his busy schedule, he called me every single day, even if just for 5 minutes to check in. Those calls meant everything to me. I raised James entirely on my own after his father Richard walked out when James was only 7 years old. Richard simply decided family life wasn't for him and disappeared without so much as a goodbye to his son. I still remember holding James as he cried himself to sleep night after night, wondering why his daddy didn't love him enough to stay. I promised myself then that I would give him enough love for 2 parents, and I believe I did. For 40 years I taught English at Roosevelt High School. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided stability for us, and I loved watching generations of students discover their voices through literature. When I retired at 65, James insisted on throwing me a grand party. Nearly 300 former students attended. It was one of the proudest moments of my life, seeing all those grown adults whose lives I had touched in some small way. James met Minuera at a tech conference in San Francisco 5 years ago. He called me that very night, excitement bubbling through the phone. "Mom, I met someone incredible today," he said. "She understands my work in a way no one ever has before." Minuera was stunning, that much was obvious from the photos he sent. Tall and slender with perfect skin and dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She was a software developer specializing in security protocols, brilliant in her own right. In those early days, she seemed genuinely kind, always asking about my health and sending thoughtful gifts for no particular occasion. Their romance moved at lightning speed. Within 6 months, James proposed on a weekend trip to Paris. I expressed my concerns about the whirlwind nature of their relationship, gently suggesting they might take more time to know each other before making such a commitment. James just laughed. "When you know, Mom," he said with absolute certainty. So I swallowed my reservations and supported my son, wanting nothing more than his happiness. 2 years before James died, his cybersecurity startup was acquired by a major tech conglomerate. The sale made him incredibly wealthy almost overnight. He purchased a stunning home in Seattle with 5 bedrooms, a home theater, and breathtaking views of Puget Sound. The property even included a separate guest house, which James insisted would be my permanent residence whenever I wanted to stay. "You never have to worry about anything again, Mom," he promised. "I can finally give back a fraction of what you gave me." Those first 2 years of their marriage seemed picture perfect on the surface. Minuera was always planning elaborate parties at their new home, orchestrating exotic vacations to destinations I had only read about in travel magazines. James would call me from Tokyo, Rome, Cape Town, his voice filled with excitement as he described the adventures they were having. But even then, I noticed small things that troubled me. The way Minuera would cut James off mid-sentence to correct him. How she insisted on managing their social calendar entirely. The subtle way she would roll her eyes when James talked about his childhood or our family traditions. Once during a holiday dinner, James mentioned wanting to take me on a mother-son trip to London to see the theaters and historical sites I had always dreamed of visiting. Before I could even respond, Minuera interjected, "James, you know that conflicts with the tech summit in Singapore. Besides, your mother would struggle with all that walking." James immediately backpedaled, apologizing for not checking their schedule first. I said nothing, but that night I noticed how he deferred to her on every decision, no matter how small. Still, James seemed happy, and that was what mattered to me. Whenever I tried to check in with him privately about their relationship, he would assure me everything was wonderful. "Minuera just likes things a certain way," he would explain. "Her attention to detail is what makes her such a brilliant developer." So I pushed my concerns aside and focused on enjoying the beautiful life my son had created. I never imagined how quickly it would all crumble. The call came at 3:14 in the morning. I remember staring at the red numbers on my bedside clock as I fumbled to answer the phone, my heart already racing with the certainty that middle-of-the-night calls never bring good news. It was a doctor with a British accent, his voice grave and formal. James had suffered a massive heart attack in his London hotel room. By the time the hotel staff had found him, it was too late. My son, my beautiful boy, was gone at just 45 years old. The room spun around me as I clutched the phone, begging the doctor to be wrong. There had to be some mistake. James was young, healthy, careful about what he ate. He even ran marathons, for goodness sake. Heart attacks happen to older people, not to vibrant men with their whole lives ahead of them, not to my only child. I called Minuera immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the buttons. Her response was unsettlingly calm. "I see," she said when I managed to choke out the news between sobs. "I suppose I need to contact our lawyer and the funeral home." No tears, no breakdown, no expression of the earth-shattering grief that was already consuming me. Just a business-like assessment of tasks to be completed. The days that followed exist in my memory as a blur of pain so acute it felt physical, like someone had carved out my vital organs and left me hollow. Minuera handled all the arrangements for bringing James home and planning the funeral. When I tried to participate to suggest the hymns he had loved as a boy or readings that would honor his generous spirit, she dismissed my input entirely. "America, I appreciate your suggestions, but as his wife, I know what James would have wanted," she said. Though her plans included none of the personal touches that had defined my son. The funeral was small, just a handful of business associates and a few friends. No childhood photos, no stories of the kind-hearted boy who had grown into such an exceptional man. It felt sterile and corporate, nothing like the celebration of life my son deserved. After the service, I asked if I could take a few of his personal items, mementos from his childhood that I had given him over the years. Minuera refused. "Everything needs to be inventoried for the estate," she said. When I protested that surely his baseball glove from Little League or the collection of science fiction novels he treasured couldn't have significant financial value, her expression hardened. "You are overreacting," she said coldly. "James is gone. These things are just objects now." As if my grief was an inconvenience, an emotional messiness she found distasteful. That evening, as I sat alone in the guest house, surrounded by sympathy cards from former students and colleagues, I overheard Minuera on the phone through the open kitchen window. "Yes, I know," she was saying to someone, her voice low but clear in the quiet night. "But I need to handle getting rid of the old lady first. She is becoming a problem." A pause, then a laugh. "Trust me, by next week this will all be sorted out and we can move forward with our plans." I sat frozen, unable to process what I had just heard. Surely she couldn't be talking about me. But deep down I knew. The coldness, the distance, the irritation, whenever I expressed my grief, it suddenly made horrible sense. Minuera wanted me gone. The very next morning, less than 24 hours after we had buried my only child, Minuera knocked on the door of the guest house. She didn't bother with pleasantries or even the pretense of sympathy. "America, I think it's time for you to leave," she said, her voice flat. "James is gone, and frankly there's no reason for you to stay on the property anymore." I stared at her disbelief, rendering me momentarily speechless. "But this is my home," I finally managed. "James wanted me here. Where would I even go?" Her expression didn't soften. If anything, her eyes grew colder. "That's not really my concern, is it? Now pack your bags and learn to survive." The casual cruelty of her words felt like a physical blow. "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "I have nowhere else to go. All my savings went to medical bills when I had pneumonia last year. James was helping me rebuild my finances." "Not my problem," Minuera replied, checking her expensive watch. "I'll give you 3 hours to collect your things. Anything left behind will be disposed of." So there I stood, a 68-year-old widow, packing the few belongings I had into my ancient Honda Civic, while my daughter-in-law watched impatiently from her designer lounge chair on the patio. The woman who had shared holiday meals with me, who had called me mom at her wedding, was now evicting me days after my son's funeral. The humiliation burned almost as badly as the grief. "You can't do this," I said as I placed the last bag in my trunk. This isn't what James would have wanted. Minwera didn't even look up from her phone. James isn't here anymore, and neither should you be. As I drove away from the beautiful home my son had built, the place where I thought I would spend my remaining years surrounded by his love, I couldn't comprehend how my life had disintegrated so completely. In the span of a week, I had lost my child, my home, and any sense of security I had ever known. That first night in my car, parked in the far corner of a Walmart parking lot, reality hit me with crushing force. I was homeless. At 68 years old, after a lifetime of hard work and careful planning, I was sleeping in the reclined driver's seat of a 10-year-old Honda Civic, with no idea where I would go next. The physical discomfort was immediate and relentless. My arthritic hips screamed in protest at the awkward position. The seats that had seemed perfectly adequate for driving were torture to sleep on. Despite the mild Seattle spring, the night air grew cold enough that I had to run the engine periodically for heat, watching my gas gauge with growing anxiety. Each time I dozed off, I would jerk awake at unfamiliar sounds: the distant shout of teenagers in the parking lot, the rumble of delivery trucks arriving before dawn. But the physical discomfort paled in comparison to the emotional devastation. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw James, his gap-toothed smile as a child, his proud face at his college graduation, the way he had hugged me tight at Christmas, and promised we would always take care of each other. And then, unbidden, the image of Minuera's cold stare as she ordered me to leave would intrude, jolting me back to my grim reality. Morning brought new challenges. The basic routines most people take for granted became logistical puzzles. Where could I brush my teeth, use a bathroom, change my clothes without exposing myself? I discovered that the Walmart had public restrooms where I could wash up in small increments, careful not to linger too long and draw attention from employees. I learned to change clothes in the cramped back seat, contorting my aging body in ways that left me sore for hours afterward. I tried calling old friends from the neighborhood where I'd lived before moving to James's guest house, but most had either moved away or passed on. A few expressed sympathy, but offered vague excuses about why they couldn't help limited space or visiting grandchildren. I didn't blame them. Who wants to take in an elderly woman with no immediate prospects? My retirement savings, once modest but sufficient, had been severely depleted by a bout of pneumonia the previous year. The 3 weeks in the hospital had cost a fortune, even with Medicare. James had been helping me rebuild my financial cushion, but now that lifeline was gone. I had approximately $2,800 to my name, not enough for a rental deposit and certainly not enough to live on for long. Hunger became a constant companion. I couldn't afford restaurants, and without cooking facilities, my options were limited to cold sandwiches from grocery stores and whatever non-perishable items I could store in my car. I rationed myself to 2 small meals a day, ignoring the persistent emptiness in my stomach and the lightheadedness that came with it. Each day I called Minuera's number, hoping that perhaps her conscience would awaken, that she might realize the cruelty of what she had done. Each call went straight to voicemail. After the 5th day, my number was blocked entirely. One evening, about 10 days after becoming homeless, I drove past James and Minuera's house on an impulse. The driveway was filled with expensive cars, music, and laughter spilling from the open windows. Minuera was hosting a party less than 2 weeks after my son's death. I parked across the street and watched as guests in cocktail attire arrived bearing gifts and bottles of champagne. This wasn't a memorial gathering, this was a celebration. I sat there until my tears made it impossible to see, then drove away, a new kind of pain blooming in my chest. The hardest part perhaps was the invisibility. As a homeless older woman, I became utterly unseen. People actively avoided eye contact with me at gas stations or in parks where I would sit during the day. Once I was asked to leave a coffee shop where I had purchased a small tea, the manager explaining that they had a 30-minute seating policy, though I had watched younger customers remain for hours with their laptops. I had taught generations of students about dignity and self-respect, yet here I was, treated as if I were less than human. 13 days into my homelessness, a severe rainstorm hit the Seattle area. the kind of drenching, relentless downpour that seems to find every possible entry point. My car, reliable in many ways, had a small leak around the sunroof. By midnight, my seat was soaked water dripping steadily onto my shoulders. I sat in a 24-hour diner until the waitress began giving me pointed looks, then reluctantly spent almost $100 on a dingy motel room for a single night. It was a significant portion of my remaining money, but the thought of another night in the wet car had become unbearable. That one night of proper sleep in a real bed made returning to the car the next day even more difficult. A persistent cough had developed from sleeping in the damp conditions, and my joints ached constantly now. I caught my reflection in a store window and barely recognized the haggard woman staring back at me. Hollow-eyed hair, unwashed shoulders permanently hunched, as if to make myself smaller, less noticeable, less of a burden on the world that had no place for me. On the 15th day, I sat on a bench in a small neighborhood park watching families with young children enjoy the playground. An overwhelming wave of despair crashed over me. I would never see James's children, never hold my grandchildren, or tell them stories about their father. I had failed in the most fundamental way, outliving my only child. And now, without him, I had no protection against a world that had no use for aging women with empty bank accounts. I put my face in my hands and sobbed deep body-shaking cries that came from the very core of my being. No one approached. No one asked if I needed help. In a crowded park on a sunny afternoon, I was completely alone. On the morning of the 16th day, I woke up with a decision made. I would go to a homeless shelter. The thought filled me with dread. Every story I'd heard about the dangers, the indignities, the exposure to illness in such places. But my cough was worsening, and I had begun to feel dizzy spells that concerned me. Pride wouldn't keep me warm or fed, and I was running out of options. I had just pulled out the community resource guide I'd picked up at a library when my phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with a Seattle area code. Probably another robocall about car warranties or Medicare supplements, but I answered anyway, desperate for any human contact. "Mrs. Wilson, America Wilson?" a Malay voice inquired. "Yes, this is America," I replied cautiously. "My name is Thomas Reynolds. I was your son, James's personal attorney. I've been trying to locate you for 2 weeks now." My first thought was that this was some kind of scam. Grief makes you vulnerable, and I'd read about predators who target the recently bereaved. "If you're James's attorney, tell me something only his lawyer would know," I challenged. There was a slight pause. 2 years ago, James set up a trust for the restoration of your childhood home in Missouri, the one with the wraparound porch and blue shutters that was damaged in the flood. He planned to surprise you with it, for your 70th birthday. My breath caught. I had mentioned that house to James only once, showing him old photographs and lamenting that the beautiful Victorian where I'd spent my childhood had fallen into disrepair after my parents died. I had never discussed it with anyone else. "Where are you, Mrs. Wilson?" Thomas asked, concern evident in his voice. "I've been to the guest house multiple times, but you weren't there, and Miss Diaz, that is Mrs. Wilson, refused to provide your contact information." The mention of Minuera by her maiden name struck me as odd, but I was too focused on the fact that James's lawyer had been looking for me to dwell on it. I hesitated, shame washing over me. "I've been staying various places. Minuera asked me to leave after the funeral." What? The shock in his voice was unmistakable. "Mrs. Wilson, this is extremely concerning. Would you be willing to meet me at my office today? I have important information about James's estate that you need to hear immediately." 2 hours later, I sat in a plush leather chair in the downtown offices of Reynolds, Blackman and Associates. I had done my best to make myself presentable in a gas station bathroom, but I was acutely aware of my rumpled clothes and unwashed hair. Thomas Reynolds, a distinguished man in his late 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, showed no reaction to my disheveled appearance. "Mrs. Wilson, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock." He began, placing a thick folder on the desk between us. "James made significant changes to his will 6 months ago, changes that Minuera Diaz Wilson was not aware of." He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. Your son converted a substantial portion of his assets, approximately 11 million euros, into a trust in your name. The funds are held in offshore accounts that only you can access as the sole beneficiary. I stared at him, certain I had misheard. 11 million euros, yes. James diversified his holdings internationally after the company acquisition. The current exchange rate makes it worth slightly more in dollars. He paused, watching my face carefully. Mrs. Wilson, you are a very wealthy woman. The room seemed to tilt around me. But why wouldn't James tell me, or Minuera? Thomas's expression darkened. That brings me to the difficult part of our conversation. In the months before his death, James had become suspicious of his wife's motives and fidelity. He consulted me about divorce proceedings. My hand flew to my mouth. Divorce. But they seemed. James was a private person who didn't want to worry you, Thomas explained gently. But he had discovered troubling information. After certain incidents raised his suspicions, he installed security cameras in their home. The footage confirmed his fears. Minuera was having affairs, at least two, that he documented, and he also recorded conversations where she discussed her plans to access his money. Each word felt like another blow. My poor son dealing with such betrayal alone, protecting me from the truth even as his marriage crumbled. James was preparing to file for divorce when he left for London, Thomas continued. The trust in your name was his way of ensuring that no matter what happened with the divorce proceedings, you would be taken care of. He didn't want Minuera to know about these arrangements until they were finalized. Tears streamed down my face, but they were different from the tears of the past 2 weeks. These were tears of vindication, mixed with a fresh wave of grief for what my son had endured. The most immediate concern, Thomas said, handing me a tissue, is your current living situation. As the beneficiary of James's trust and under the terms of his will, you are entitled to continued residence in the guest house. Minuera had no legal right to evict you. Furthermore, there are stipulations regarding the main house that she is certainly violating. What happens now? I asked my mind, struggling to process everything. First, we get you comfortable, Thomas said firmly. I've taken the liberty of reserving a suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. You'll have a place to rest, proper meals, and an opportunity to regroup. I've also arranged for some new clothes to be delivered to the hotel. All expenses are covered by the trust. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Then, if you're willing, we begin holding Minuera accountable. James left extensive evidence, Mrs. Wilson. He wanted to protect you, and now we can honor his wishes by ensuring justice is served. As I left Thomas's office that afternoon, the world looked entirely different. The weight of destitution had lifted, replaced by a new sense of purpose. James was still taking care of me, even after death. And I would not waste the gift he had given me. The presidential suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel was larger than the entire apartment where I had raised James. As I soaked in the deep marble bathtub hot water soothing my aching joints for the first time in weeks, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. The revelation that my son had been unhappily married, planning a divorce, and secretly setting up financial protection for me was overwhelming. Part of me wanted to rush straight to the house and confront Minuera to watch her face as she learned that her schemes had failed. But as I wrapped myself in the plush hotel robe, I remembered something I used to tell my English students. The best revenge isn't swift and hot, it's patient and cold. Impulse would give Minuera time to prepare to hide evidence, to craft excuses. Strategy would give me justice. The next morning, refreshed after my first real night's sleep since James's death, I met Thomas at his office. I had dressed in one of the new outfits that had been delivered to my hotel suite, a simple but elegant navy pants suit that made me look like the respected teacher I had once been, not the homeless woman I had become. I want to handle this carefully, I told Thomas, not out of any mercy for Minuera, but because I want to make absolutely certain she cannot wriggle out of the consequences of what she's done. Thomas nodded approvingly. That's wise, Mrs. Wilson. Rushing in would only give her opportunities to cover her tracks or create a counter-narrative. Over the next several days, we developed a methodical plan. First, we needed to document exactly what Minuera had been doing since James's death. Thomas hired a private investigator who confirmed my worst suspicions. Minuera had already begun selling James's personal possessions, his rare book collection, his vintage watch collection, even the specially commissioned painting he had given me for my birthday that had hung in the guest house. More disturbing still, she had moved a man into the house, a personal trainer named Marcus, who had been a regular visitor, even while James was alive. According to the investigator's report, Marcus had been seen driving James's car and wearing his clothes. The betrayal was even more complete than I had imagined. Everything she's doing violates the terms of James's will, Thomas explained as we reviewed the growing file of evidence. The house and all contents are to remain untouched until the estate is properly settled, and even then, many items were specifically bequeathed to you. I felt a surge of righteous anger, but kept my voice steady. What else do we need before we can act? We're preparing formal documentation of all violations, Thomas replied. Additionally, I've been in contact with the banks and investment firms handling James's domestic accounts. Minuera has been attempting to liquidate assets that are frozen pending estate settlement. Each attempt is being documented and added to our case. As our legal preparation continued, I spent hours alone in my hotel room, reflecting on what James would want me to do. My son had always valued fairness and dignity. Even facing his wife's betrayal, he had chosen a methodical legal approach rather than a vindictive one. I would honor him by doing the same. A week into our preparations, Thomas called with an unexpected discovery. "Mrs. Wilson, we found James's personal journal in the safe deposit box he maintained separately from his shared accounts with Minuera. I believe you should read it." That afternoon, I sat in a private conference room at the bank, turning the pages of my son's leather-bound journal. His familiar handwriting, the same careful script I had, helped him perfect an elementary school filled page after page with heartbreaking revelations. "I'm beginning to think my marriage was built on calculation, not love," he wrote in an entry from 4 months before his death. "Yesterday I overheard Minuera on the phone discussing our prenuptial agreement with someone exploring creative ways around it. I don't want to believe she married me for money, but the evidence is becoming difficult to ignore." In another entry, Mom keeps asking if everything is okay. "I hate lying to her, but she adores Minuera, and I don't want to burden her with this mess. Better to handle it quietly, and then help Mom adjust afterward. She's been through enough in her life without watching my marriage implode." Tears blurred my vision as I read his final entry dated just days before his fatal trip. Meeting with Thomas finalized the trust for Mom. No matter what happens with the divorce, she'll be secure. It's the least I can do after all she sacrificed for me. Once I return from London, I'll file the papers and finally end this charade of a marriage. Then maybe Mom and I can take that trip to England we've always talked about. After all this darkness, I could use some new memories in a place with no ghosts. He had been thinking of me, planning for our future together, even as his own life was in turmoil. The knowledge strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about justice for me, it was about honoring James's last wishes and intentions. The next day, with our evidence compiled and our strategy finalized, Thomas filed formal legal action against Minuera. The documentation was overwhelming photographic evidence of items being removed from the house financial records, showing attempted withdrawals from frozen accounts, security footage from James's hidden cameras showing Minuera with Marcus, while James was traveling for business, and statements from household staff, who had witnessed her explicitly planning to get rid of the old lady immediately after the funeral. "What happens now?" I asked Thomas, after the papers were filed. "Now," he said with quiet confidence, "we take back what's rightfully yours." The morning of the confrontation dawned clear and bright, a beautiful Seattle spring day that belied the storm we were about to unleash. I dressed carefully in a tailored black suit, one of several Thomas had arranged for me. "Appearance matters in these situations," he had advised. "You want to project strength and dignity." We met at his office, first reviewing our approach one final time. In addition to Thomas and myself, our group included his paralegal Rachel, who would document everything, and 2 King County Sheriff's deputies, who would serve the official papers and provide security if needed. "Remember," Thomas advised as we prepared to leave, "no matter what she says or does, maintain your composure. Your dignity is your power here." The drive to James's house, the house that was now legally mine under the terms of his will, felt surreal. Just 3 weeks earlier, I had fled this place in tears, humiliated and homeless. Now I was returning not as a supplicant, but as the rightful owner. We arrived in 2 vehicles parking directly in the circular driveway, rather than discreetly on the street. This was not a time for subtlety. Thomas rang the doorbell, while the deputies stood slightly behind us, their presence unmistakable in their uniforms. Miniera answered the door in yoga clothes, her face registering first confusion, then shock as she recognized me standing beside Thomas. "What is this?" she demanded, her eyes darting between us and the deputies. "Mrs. Wilson," Thomas said. "Formally, we are here to serve you with legal documents regarding the estate of James Wilson and to implement the court order effective immediately." Her expression hardened as she looked at me. "Whatever she's told you is a lie. She's mentally unstable from grief. James would never have wanted her involved in our home." "Our documentation indicates otherwise," Thomas replied calmly, handing her the thick envelope of legal papers. "These papers confirm that under the terms of James Wilson's will, his mother, America Wilson, is the legal owner of this property and all its contents. You have been residing here illegally since you evicted her, and you have been selling items that do not belong to you." Minuera's face drained of color. "That's impossible. I'm his wife." "Yes," I said, speaking for the first time, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. "You were his wife, the wife who was unfaithful to him, the wife who was recorded discussing ways to access his money without his knowledge, the wife who threw his mother out onto the street days after his funeral." Her eyes widened at the mention of recordings. "You're bluffing. There's no proof of anything." Thomas removed a tablet from his briefcase and played a short video clip, James's security footage, showing Minuera and Marcus in an intimate embrace in the kitchen, followed by her clear voice saying, "Once we figure out how to move money, we can stop pretending. James suspects something, but he can't prove anything." "There are hours more," Thomas informed her. "James documented everything before his death. He was preparing to divorce you." A man appeared behind Minuera, bare-chested and confused. Marcus the First presumed wearing what looked like a pair of James's designer lounge pants. "What's going on, babe?" he asked. Minuera whirled on him. "Shut up and go upstairs." But the damage was done. His presence only confirmed everything we had documented. Under the court order, Thomas continued as if there had been no interruption. "Mrs. America Wilson is to take immediate possession of the property. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings, only items that belonged to you before your marriage to James Wilson. Everything else must remain. The deputies will supervise the removal of your things to ensure compliance." Marcus, apparently grasping the situation faster than Minuera, disappeared upstairs without another word. When he reappeared minutes later, he was fully dressed and carrying a duffel bag. "I'm out of here," he announced, brushing past Minuera without meeting her eyes. "This is not what you promised, and I'm not sticking around for it." "Marcus," she called after him, but he was already heading for his car, leaving her to face the consequences alone. With the deputies as witnesses, we entered the house. I moved with purpose toward the guest house, first relieved to find it largely untouched. Then methodically, Thomas and I began inspecting the main house, identifying items that had been moved or were missing from the inventory James had meticulously maintained. In what had been James's home office, I discovered empty spaces where his collection of first-edition science fiction novels had stood, a collection we had built together over years of birthdays and Christmases. "Where are my son's books?" I asked Minuera, who had been following us, interjecting protests and excuses that we largely ignored. "I donated them to charity," she claimed. "James would have wanted that." Thomas made a note. "The sale records from Powell's Books in Portland indicate otherwise. Each book was sold individually to maximize profit. That will be added to the financial damages." As we continued our inspection, Minuera's demeanor cycled through rage, manipulation, and finally desperate bargaining. "We can work something out," she suggested, her voice. "Honey sweet, this house is too big for just you. We could share it, or I could buy you out. James would have wanted us to get along." "James wanted you out of his life," I replied quietly. He just didn't live long enough to make it happen. In James's closet, I found empty spaces where his most treasured possessions should have been the hand-carved chess set his grandfather had made him, the collection of fountain pens I had given him when he graduated college, the small, bronze sculpture he had bought on our one trip to Italy together. "Where are these items?" Thomas asked, showing Minuera the inventory list. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she insisted. One of the deputies cleared his throat. "Ma'am, withholding or concealing assets under a court order can result in criminal charges for contempt and potentially grand theft." Something in his tone must have penetrated her denial. "Fine," she snapped. "Some things are in storage. I was planning to sell them at auction next month." By late afternoon, we had completed our initial assessment. Thomas arranged for a security service to monitor the house, while Minuera packed her personal belongings. "Is that really necessary?" she protested. "You're treating me like a criminal." "No," I said, looking her directly in the eyes. "I'm treating you like someone who evicted a grieving mother after her only child died. Someone who said, 'Pack your bags and learn to survive.' Well, I did survive, Minuera, and now I'm taking back what's mine." I spent that night in a hotel, not quite ready to sleep in the house filled with so many memories of James. But as I lay in bed, I felt a weight lifting. For the first time since receiving that terrible phone call from London, I could breathe without the crushing pressure of both grief and fear. James had protected me even in death, and I had found the strength to fight back. The next day, I returned to oversee Minuera's departure. She had called in movers for her clothing and personal items, working under the watchful eyes of the security team. As the last box was loaded, she approached me on the front steps. "You've ruined everything," she hissed, her composed facade finally cracking. "Do you have any idea what I went through being married to your precious son? The boring business dinners? The constant calls to his mommy, the way he scrutinized every expense." I regarded her calmly. "What you went through was being married to a generous, successful man who loved you despite your betrayal. What I went through was sleeping in a car at 68 years old after burying my only child. I think we both learned valuable lessons about survival, don't you?" She had no response to that. Without another word, she stalked to her car and drove away, leaving behind the house the wealth and the facade she had created. As I stood in the doorway watching her disappear down the long driveway, Thomas joined me. "Congratulations, Mrs. Wilson. The house is yours now, officially and completely." I turned to him with a sad smile. "Thank you for everything, but please call me America. I think after all this we can dispense with formalities." That night I slept in the guest house where James had wanted me to live all along. Despite the victory of the day, grief washed over me anew as I lay in bed, the reality of James's absence impossible to ignore. But beneath the grief was something new, a sense of purpose, of justice served, of promises kept. I had survived, just as Minuera had mockingly instructed me to do. But I had done it with dignity intact, and my son's memory honored. The weeks following Minuera's departure were both healing and painful. The house beautiful as it was echoed with James's absence. Each room held memories that could bring me to tears without warning. His laughter drifting from the kitchen, the way he would call out, "Mom, come see this." When something excited him, the spot by the fireplace where we would sit drinking tea. On rainy evenings. Initially, I found myself wandering from room to room, touching his belongings, searching for some lingering essence of my son. But gradually, I realized that living among the undisturbed relics of his life wasn't healthy for either my grief process or my future. With Thomas's help, I began the difficult task of sorting through James's possessions. His business suits and formal wear I donated to a program that provided interview clothes for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. James would have loved that his success could help others start their own journeys. Personal items that held special meaning: his childhood teddy bear, the collection of handwritten letters I had sent him throughout college, the photo albums documenting our life together. These I kept carefully, organizing them so that his blank story remained intact and honored. Using a portion of the inheritance, I established the James Wilson Scholarship Fund for students interested in ethical technology development. The first year we awarded 10 full scholarships to to promising young people who might otherwise never have had the opportunity to pursue higher education. At the award ceremony, I shared stories of James's kindness and integrity, ensuring that his legacy would continue through the achievements of these students. After 3 months in the large Seattle house, I made another difficult decision. The property, grand as it was, felt too empty, too full of ghosts. I purchased a smaller, warm home in a vibrant neighborhood, with a view of Puget Sound. It was big enough for comfort but small enough to feel cozy, with a lovely garden where I could plant the flowers James and I had always talked about growing together. The grieving process took its own winding path. Some days were almost normal, where I could smile at memories and feel grateful for the time I'd had with my extraordinary son. Other days, grief would ambush me, leaving me breathless with loss, curled on the sofa, unable to face the world. But those days grew less frequent as time passed. I began seeing a grief counselor, a gentle woman named Dr. Rivera, who specialized in helping older adults navigate loss. "You're experiencing compound trauma," she explained during our first session. "Not just the death of your child, which is already one of the most difficult experiences a person can endure, but also betrayal, homelessness, and a profound violation of trust. Be patient with yourself. Healing will come, but it won't be linear." She was right. Healing came in unexpected moments and through unexpected channels. I joined a support group for parents who had lost adult children, finding solace in the company of others who truly understood the particular pain of outliving your child. Through the group, I met Eleanor, a retired nurse whose son had died of cancer 2 years earlier. Our friendship became a lifeline for both of us, 2 women rebuilding lives we never expected to be living. 6 months after the confrontation with Minuera, Thomas called with news. She tried to contest the will, he informed me. Claimed James wasn't of sound mind when he made the changes, that you had undue influence over him. What happened? I asked, my stomach tightening at the thought of another legal battle. The case was dismissed almost immediately, he assured me. The evidence was overwhelming: your son's journal, the security footage, the documented timeline of his legal decisions. Her own behavior after his death destroyed any credibility she might have had. It's over, America. She has no further legal recourse. I could have pursued additional legal action against Minuera for the items she had sold before we intervened, for the emotional distress of being rendered homeless, for any number of legitimate grievances. But after careful consideration, I chose not to. James wouldn't want his legacy to be years of bitter court battles, I explained to Thomas. He valued peace and forward movement, so do I. Thomas had become more than just my attorney during these months. His kindness extended beyond professional obligation, checking on me regularly, bringing books he thought I might enjoy, even inviting me to dinner with his family on holidays so I wouldn't be alone. Through him, I began building a new social circle, meeting people who knew nothing of my tragedy and accepted me simply as America, not as poor America who lost her son. One morning, about 8 months after James died, I was reading the local paper and came across an article about the rising number of elderly homeless women in Seattle. The statistics were staggering, and the stories heartbreakingly familiar: women who had fallen through society's cracks after losing partners, facing health crises, or experiencing financial setbacks. I remembered those 15 days in my car, the invisibility, the fear, the constant uncertainty, and knew immediately what I needed to do. I contacted a local shelter that specialized in helping older women in crisis. "I'd like to volunteer," I told the director. "And I'd like to discuss establishing a special fund for emergency housing for women over 60. The Silver Sisters Safe Harbor program launched 3 months later, providing immediate temporary housing, legal assistance, and financial counseling for women facing late-life homelessness. Working with these women, sharing my own experience without shame, gave purpose to the pain I had endured. Each woman who found security through the program became part of James's extended legacy. Occasionally, I would hear snippets of information about Minuera. She had moved to Phoenix. She was working at a mid-level tech company. The man she had betrayed James with had not stayed in her life. I felt no satisfaction in these reports, but no pity either. She had made her choices, as we all do, and was living with their consequences. As the 1-year anniversary of James's death approached, I returned to London, staying in the same hotel where he had spent his final night. I visited the hospital where he had died, thanking the staff who had tried to save him and who had treated his body with dignity afterward. I walked the streets he had walked, ate at restaurants he might have enjoyed, and finally found myself in a peaceful garden in Regent's Park. Sitting on a bench surrounded by spring flowers, I spoke to him as I often did. I survived, James, just like she told me to. But I did it with your help, with your love reaching out to protect me even after you were gone. I wish with all my heart that you were still here, that we could be planning that London theater trip together, that I could hug you one more time. But I promise you this, I will live the rest of my life honoring your generosity by extending it to others. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and for a moment I felt a profound sense of peace, as if James had somehow heard me. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. Grief doesn't disappear. It transforms, becoming part of the landscape of your heart, rather than a storm that threatens to drown you. I will always miss my son. I will always wish for one more day, one more conversation, one more chance to tell him how proud I am of the man he became. But I've learned that survival isn't just about having shelter and food. True survival means maintaining your dignity, your compassion, and your capacity for joy, even when life has taken what you thought you couldn't live without. If you're watching this and facing your own impossible loss or betrayal, please know that the darkness does not last forever. There is a path forward even when you cannot see it yet. Sometimes we must learn to survive in ways we never imagined, but within that survival lies the possibility of a meaningful life transformed by grief, but not defined by it. I'd love to hear your stories of resilience in the comments below. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a devastating loss? What helped you find your way forward? Please like and subscribe if this story touched your heart, and share it with someone who might need to hear that survival is possible, even in our darkest moments. Thank you for listening to an old woman's journey from despair to purpose. Remember, we are stronger than we know, until being strong is the only choice we have.